The moment you lose control of your emotions, someone else takes control of you. Most people never realize this because anger feels powerful in the body. The pulse rises. The voice sharpens. The mind believes it has entered a state of strength. But what actually happens is far more humiliating. The instant anger appears, your thoughts become predictable. Your behavior becomes readable. Your weaknesses rise to the surface like poison leaking through cracked skin. Every manipulative person understands this secret. They do not fear emotional people. They study them. A calm mind cannot be steered easily, but an angry mind can be guided like an animal with a rope around its neck. That is why provocateurs exist everywhere. They exist in offices, families, relationships, politics, media, and social circles. They are not trying to defeat you physically. They are trying to make you react emotionally, because the person who controls your reaction controls your decisions. The terrifying part is that most emotional reactions happen automatically. Someone insults your ego, and you explode before thought arrives. Someone ignores your value, and your mind begins burning for validation. Someone challenges your identity, and suddenly your peace disappears. In those moments, you believe you are defending yourself, but what you are actually defending is a fragile emotional addiction. Anger becomes the drug that gives temporary relief while silently destroying your image. People may fear rage for a moment, but they lose respect for it over time, because emotional instability reveals insecurity beneath the noise. Truly dangerous people rarely need to raise their voices, because their silence already controls the room. Their stillness makes weaker minds panic. Society quietly rewards emotional weakness because emotional people are easier to influence. Entire industries survive by harvesting outrage from exhausted minds. News channels know fear keeps attention trapped. Social platforms know anger spreads faster than wisdom. Toxic people know emotional reactions create confusion that can be exploited later. Every day, millions of minds are trained to react instantly, without reflection. A stranger writes a sentence online, and another stranger loses peace for hours. A small insult becomes an emotional wildfire. A disagreement becomes hatred. A delayed message becomes anxiety. Human beings are slowly becoming addicted to emotional stimulation because stillness now feels unfamiliar. Silence feels uncomfortable to minds trained for chaos. This is why many people secretly enjoy outrage, even while claiming to hate it. Emotional drama gives the brain intensity. Intensity creates temporary meaning. The mind begins craving conflict because conflict distracts it from emptiness. That craving becomes dangerous because once a person is addicted to emotional reaction, they become programmable. Their mood depends on external events. Their identity depends on validation. Their sense of importance depends on attention. Manipulators recognize this instantly. They understand that emotional people reveal themselves within minutes. A calm person hides intentions. A reactive person exposes them freely. Watch any argument closely, and the pattern becomes obvious. The calmer individual slowly gains psychological height, while the emotional individual shrinks without noticing. One begins observing while the other begins performing. One controls the atmosphere, while the other becomes controlled by it. Emotional reactions feel honest in the moment, but they often become evidence of inner dependence later. Calmness is concealed authority hiding in plain sight. People never notice how often they are emotionally baited throughout the day. Someone cuts them off in traffic, and the entire nervous system ignites. Someone receives more attention, and envy quietly poisons the mind. Someone speaks with disrespect, and pride begins demanding retaliation. The world understands human ego better than humans understand themselves. That is why emotional provocation has become one of the most effective forms of control in modern life. The easiest way to weaken a person is not through force. It is through emotional disruption. Once the mind becomes emotionally flooded, intelligence collapses. People reveal secrets they should have protected. They destroy opportunities they spent years building. They ruin relationships in moments that feel justified, but later become unforgettable regrets. The frightening truth is that many people provoking you are not even angry themselves. They are strategic. They remain emotionally detached while you burn from the inside. They know that once emotion takes over your thinking, your discipline disappears. Your patience disappears. Your self-awareness disappears. Emotional people often believe they are being authentic when in reality, they are surrendering control to an impulse. Calm individuals understand something deeper. They understand that silence forces others to project meaning into the empty space. Silence creates uncertainty. Silence creates tension. Silence creates psychological pressure. The person who remains emotionally steady during chaos instantly appears more powerful because emotional restraint signals hidden confidence. Weak people chase reactions. Strong people study reactions. Emotionally untouchable people become impossible to manipulate because they never reveal what can be used against them. There is a reason emotionally reactive people are rarely respected for long. Others may tolerate them. Others may even fear them temporarily. But deep inside, people stop trusting unstable energy. Rage creates noise, but calmness creates gravity. A person who cannot regulate emotion cannot maintain authority because emotional instability constantly leaks desperation. Every outburst silently tells the world that external events control your inner state. Every impulsive reaction tells observers exactly where your insecurities live. People collect this information quietly. They learn what triggers you. They learn what insults penetrate your confidence. They learn how to move your emotions like pieces on a board. The disturbing reality is that many social battles are won before words are even spoken. The calmer person already possesses the advantage because emotional control sharpens perception. While reactive people are drowning inside, feeling calm people are studying body language, tone, timing, and weakness. They are watching everything. This is why emotionally disciplined individuals often dominate negotiations, relationships, leadership, and conflict without appearing aggressive. They understand that composure itself becomes psychological warfare. The moment another person realizes they cannot provoke you, fear begins growing inside them. They lose the power of emotional access. They lose the ability to predict your behavior. Your calmness becomes intimidating because people expect emotional doors they can enter. When those doors remain closed, mystery appears. Mystery unsettles weak minds because humans naturally fear what they cannot emotionally read. Silence, therefore, becomes more than restraint. It becomes controlled presence. It becomes invisible armor. Modern culture constantly encourages emotional exhibition because exposed emotions create profitable attention. People are rewarded for public outrage, public breakdowns, public arguments, and public validation seeking. The louder the reaction, the more visibility it receives. Quiet self-control rarely trends because discipline cannot be exploited as easily as chaos. Entire digital systems are designed around emotional stimulation. Algorithms learn which fears keep you engaged. They learn which topics ignite anger. They learn which insecurities pull you deeper into endless reaction. Most people believe they are freely expressing themselves online, while invisible systems are training their nervous systems to remain emotionally restless. Over time, the mind loses tolerance for peace. Stillness begins feeling empty. Reflection begins feeling slow. Emotional intensity becomes entertainment. This creates a generation that mistakes reaction for identity. Many people no longer ask whether their emotions are useful. They only ask whether their emotions are visible. But emotionally untouchable people operate differently. They understand that private control creates public power. They understand that silence protects energy. They understand that attention is not influence and emotional expression is not strength. Real strength is the ability to absorb pressure without surrendering mental clarity. Anyone can explode. Exploding is instinctive. Remaining composed while disrespected, misunderstood, challenged, or provoked requires terrifying levels of inner discipline. That discipline changes the atmosphere around a person. Calm individuals begin appearing unreachable. Their restraint feels dangerous because others cannot detect emotional openings. People become cautious around those who remain difficult to emotionally disturb. The deepest trap of anger is that it often disguises itself as righteousness. The mind convinces itself that emotional reaction is proof of passion, integrity, or courage. But many reactions are simply wounded egos searching for relief. Ego cannot tolerate being ignored, corrected, challenged, or dismissed. It craves recognition constantly. When recognition disappears, anger often rises to defend a fragile sense of importance. This is why some people become addicted to conflict without realizing it. Conflict temporarily restores emotional significance. Being offended creates identity. Being outraged creates attention. Being reactive creates stimulation. Yet every emotional eruption slowly damages the inner world. Peace disappears first. Then focus disappears. Then judgment disappears. A person trapped in emotional addiction eventually begins living at the mercy of external triggers. Their emotional weather changes according to other people. Emotionally disciplined individuals refuse to hand strangers that level of power. They understand that protecting inner stability is more important than winning temporary emotional battles. They allow insults to die in silence. They allow disrespect to expose the character of others instead of contaminating their own minds. This restraint confuses people because most humans expect emotional access. When they cannot reach your emotions, they begin confronting their own helplessness. Calmness, therefore, becomes unsettling. It reveals who depends on chaos for power and who collapses without emotional control. The strongest minds are not cold because they feel nothing. They are powerful because they decide which emotions deserve expression and which deserve burial. At some point, the illusion breaks completely. You begin noticing how many lives are ruled by emotional reflex instead of conscious awareness. You begin seeing arguments as traps instead of victories. You begin recognizing provocation as an invitation into psychological slavery. The world starts looking different because you finally understand that emotional control is not passive behavior. It is strategic dominance. The person who remains calm while others lose themselves gains access to clarity that emotional minds cannot reach. In chaos, they observe details others miss. In conflict, they preserve energy while others self-destruct. In silence, they gather power while others reveal desperation through noise. This realization changes the way you walk, speak, respond, and even think. You stop reacting instantly. You stop explaining yourself to everyone. You stop giving emotional performances for people who feed on instability. Slowly, your presence becomes heavier. Your words become rarer and therefore more valuable. Your silence begins creating pressure inside rooms without effort. People sense restraint and mistake it for danger because disciplined calmness feels unpredictable. Emotionally untouchable individuals understand a final truth that most people never discover. The greatest form of power is not domination over others. It is refusing to surrender your inner state to anyone at all. Once no person can emotionally control you, they lose the ability to disturb your direction, manipulate your mind, or consume your peace. And in that moment, you stop behaving like prey and begin moving through the world like someone impossible to own. Every day, people walk into invisible emotional battles without realizing it. A conversation changes tone slightly, and tension immediately rises in the chest. A disrespectful comment appears online, and the mind begins preparing imaginary arguments. A family member repeats the same criticism for the 100th time, and irritation quietly starts spreading beneath the skin. Someone at work challenges your competence in front of others, and pride instantly demands retaliation. Most emotional reactions are not conscious decisions. They are automatic survival patterns learned over years of insecurity, fear, ego, conditioning, and social pressure. Human beings are constantly testing one another emotionally because reactions reveal hidden weakness faster than words ever could. The moment someone discovers what disturbs your peace, they discover where your emotional boundaries collapse. Toxic people understand this instinctively. They provoke not because they are powerful, but because reactions give them emotional leverage. They study tone, facial expressions, pauses, and frustration. Once they know what triggers you, they begin controlling the emotional atmosphere around you without effort. This is why calmness becomes such a rare form of quiet dominance in modern life. A calm person interrupts the cycle completely. Instead of feeding tension, they absorb it without surrendering composure. Instead of reacting impulsively, they remain mentally present. This restraint creates psychological discomfort inside reactive individuals because emotional people expect access to your nervous system. They expect immediate anger, immediate defense, immediate explanation. When those reactions never arrive, confusion begins replacing their confidence. Silence suddenly becomes heavier than argument. Patience suddenly becomes more intimidating than aggression. In a world addicted to emotional stimulation, the person who remains calm during pressure instantly appears different. Most people believe emotional strength means expressing every feeling openly, but emotional maturity often means understanding which emotions deserve expression and which emotions deserve control. A person who reacts emotionally to every insult, every disagreement, and every provocation slowly becomes exhausted by life itself. Their mood depends on the behavior of strangers. Their peace depends on external approval. Their confidence rises and falls according to how they are treated by other people. This creates invisible psychological slavery because emotional dependence gives the outside world constant access to the inner mind. Calm individuals understand something deeper. They understand that not every challenge deserves attention and not every opinion deserves emotional investment. Someone insulting you online may simply be searching for significance through conflict. Someone criticizing your choices may secretly resent the discipline they cannot develop within themselves. Someone attempting to embarrass you publicly may be trying to escape their own private insecurity. Emotionally disciplined people learn to see behavior psychologically instead of personally. This changes everything. Instead of reacting instantly, they begin observing motives, patterns, and emotional projections. They recognize that many attacks are actually confessions disguised as criticism. The insecure seek control through judgment. The angry seek relief through confrontation. The emotionally unstable seek stimulation through chaos. Once you understand this, the need to react begins fading naturally. Calmness no longer feels weak. It begins feeling intelligent. You stop entering emotional traps because you finally understand that every reaction carries a psychological cost. Peace becomes more valuable than proving a point to people who thrive on emotional disorder. Toxic relationships survive through emotional dependency more than love. One person provokes while the other reacts. One creates emotional instability while the other constantly tries to restore harmony. This cycle repeats until emotional exhaustion becomes normal. Many people spend years trapped in relationships where anger, manipulation, guilt, silence, and emotional pressure quietly control their nervous systems every single day. The frightening part is that emotional chaos often becomes familiar enough to feel natural. People begin mistaking intensity for connection and emotional instability for passion. Calmness feels uncomfortable because the mind has adapted to conflict. Emotionally disciplined individuals eventually recognize this dangerous pattern. They realize toxic people feed on reactions because reactions provide emotional relevance. Every argument, every explanation, every emotional outburst keeps the cycle alive. The moment emotional detachment appears, the manipulator loses influence. This is why toxic individuals often become more aggressive when calmness replaces reaction. They sense emotional access disappearing. Their usual strategies stop working. Guilt stops working. Anger stops working. Silent treatment stops working. Emotional detachment, therefore, becomes psychological freedom. It does not mean becoming cold or emotionless. It means refusing to let unstable people dictate your internal state. A calm mind protects its energy carefully because emotional energy shapes daily life more than most people understand. When peace disappears, focus disappears with it. When emotional chaos becomes constant, mental clarity slowly collapses. Calm individuals protect their minds the way disciplined warriors protect territory. They refuse unnecessary emotional battles because they understand that every emotional reaction either strengthens self-control or weakens it. Workplace politics reveal emotional weakness faster than almost any other environment. Offices are filled with hidden competition, silent resentment, fake politeness, and subtle power struggles. People interrupt each other to establish dominance. They criticize ideas publicly to appear superior. They spread gossip quietly to influence perception without direct confrontation. Emotionally reactive individuals often destroy their own credibility in these environments without realizing it. One emotional outburst can erase years of competence because emotional instability creates doubt inside observers. Calm professionals understand that composure creates authority even during pressure. When tension enters a room, they slow their breathing instead of raising their voice. When criticized unfairly, they respond with clarity instead of defensiveness. When others panic, they remain emotionally organized. This emotional stability becomes psychologically intimidating because reactive individuals expect emotional contagion. They expect others to mirror their frustration, fear, or anxiety. Calmness interrupts that expectation completely. A composed person forces emotional people to confront their own instability without saying a word. This is why silence can feel more powerful than argument in professional settings. The calm person appears centered while reactive individuals begin appearing impulsive and emotionally unreliable. Over time, people naturally trust emotional stability more than emotional intensity. Respect grows quietly around those who maintain control under pressure because calmness signals inner security. Emotionally disciplined people no longer feel the need to prove themselves constantly. Their restraint speaks before their words do. Their emotional control becomes evidence of mental strength others cannot easily imitate. Family pressure creates some of the deepest emotional triggers because childhood conditioning lives beneath adult behavior longer than most people realize. A single sentence from a parent, sibling, or relative can instantly reactivate old insecurities, fears, and emotional wounds buried for years. Many adults still unconsciously seek validation from people who emotionally shaped them during childhood. This creates painful cycles where emotional reactions feel automatic instead of intentional. A relative questions your decisions, and suddenly you feel 12 years old again, defending your worth. Someone compares you to others, and old feelings of inadequacy quietly return. Emotionally disciplined individuals begin healing when they recognize these emotional patterns consciously. They stop expecting emotionally immature people to suddenly become emotionally healthy. They stop begging for understanding from those incapable of giving it. Most importantly, they stop measuring self-worth through family approval alone. This shift creates emotional independence. Calmness becomes easier because emotional reactions no longer control identity. Mature individuals understand that emotional triggers often expose unresolved attachment rather than present danger. Instead of reacting blindly, they pause and observe their emotional state honestly. This awareness changes the entire atmosphere of difficult interactions. The nervous system slows down. The ego loses urgency. Silence becomes possible where anger once dominated automatically. Over time, emotionally disciplined people become harder to emotionally destabilize because they stop allowing old emotional programming to dictate present behavior. They learn that inner peace requires separating personal identity from the emotional chaos surrounding them. This realization quietly transforms the way they speak, listen, respond, and protect their mental energy every single day. Social judgment controls millions of people more than they admit openly. Entire personalities are shaped around avoiding criticism, gaining approval, and protecting image. Many emotional reactions are actually fear responses disguised as confidence. People argue aggressively because disagreement threatens identity. People over-explain because silence feels emotionally unsafe. People seek constant validation because their self-worth depends on external reassurance. Emotionally disciplined individuals slowly detach from this exhausting psychological dependence. They realize that attempting to control every opinion others hold is impossible and emotionally destructive. No matter how carefully you behave, someone will misunderstand, judge, criticize, or dislike you. Once this truth becomes emotionally accepted, calmness grows naturally. The mind stops fighting endless battles for universal approval. Silence becomes easier because the ego no longer needs constant defense. Emotionally mature individuals learn that confidence is not loud emotional performance. Confidence is remaining internally stable even when external validation disappears temporarily. This creates a powerful psychological shift. Rejection loses its ability to destabilize identity. Criticism becomes information instead of emotional catastrophe. Disrespect becomes reflection of the other person rather than proof of personal failure. Emotionally reactive people often believe intensity creates influence, but controlled energy creates deeper authority. People trust those who remain emotionally balanced during uncertainty because emotional steadiness creates psychological safety. Calmness, therefore, becomes more than emotional restraint. It becomes emotional leadership. It influences rooms, conversations, relationships, and conflicts quietly without demanding attention. The emotionally disciplined individual begins moving through life with less emotional noise and far greater mental clarity. Eventually, a moment arrives where calmness stops feeling like suppression and begins feeling like power. You notice yourself remaining steady in situations that once destroyed your peace completely. An insult no longer follows you home for hours. Online hatred no longer invades your nervous system. Toxic individuals no longer receive emotional access automatically. You begin realizing that emotional control is not about pretending emotions do not exist. It is about refusing to become emotionally owned by every external disturbance surrounding you. This realization changes the rhythm of your entire life. You speak slower because urgency disappears. You observe more because emotional noise no longer clouds perception. You protect your attention carefully because attention shapes emotional reality. Reactive people continue searching desperately for emotional openings while you quietly become more difficult to manipulate. Your silence begins carrying weight because it is no longer rooted in fear. It is rooted in control. Your patience begins intimidating emotional individuals because they cannot understand how someone remains steady under pressure they themselves could never tolerate. Over time, your presence changes naturally. Chaos no longer enters your mind as easily. Conflict no longer consumes your identity. You stop performing emotional reactions for approval, attention, or ego protection. Instead, you develop something far more dangerous: emotional independence. And once emotional independence becomes real, the world starts losing its ability to control your internal state. That is the moment emotionally untouchable people are truly born. Emotionally reactive people never realize how predictable they have become. They believe their anger proves strength, while the world quietly watches their lack of control expose itself in real time. The moment a person cannot regulate emotion, they become easy to manipulate because emotional impulsiveness destroys strategic thinking. An insult appears, and they immediately react. Criticism arrives, and their ego begins defending itself before logic even enters the conversation. Someone disagrees with them publicly, and suddenly, they feel an urgent psychological need to dominate the situation emotionally. This is not confidence. This is emotional dependency disguised as passion. Weak minds constantly need emotional reassurance from the outside world because they cannot generate internal stability on their own. That is why emotionally reactive people often become addicted to attention, arguments, outrage, and validation. Every emotional reaction temporarily gives them significance. Every argument makes them feel visible. Every dramatic response creates stimulation powerful enough to distract them from deeper insecurity living underneath their behavior. The problem is that emotional impulsiveness slowly destroys credibility without people noticing. Others stop trusting emotionally unstable individuals with responsibility, leadership, pressure, or long-term opportunities because emotional instability creates unpredictability. People may entertain reactive personalities for short periods, but deep respect rarely grows around someone controlled by every emotion entering their mind. Truly powerful individuals observe before reacting. They understand that emotional discipline protects decision-making while impulsiveness destroys it. The emotionally reactive person believes they are expressing themselves honestly, while in reality, they are exposing psychological weaknesses to everyone watching quietly from the outside. Emotionally reactive people sabotage their own lives more often than their enemies ever could. They ruin relationships during moments of emotional intensity, then spend years living with consequences created in minutes. They destroy professional opportunities because temporary feelings become more important than long-term outcomes. They abandon discipline whenever discomfort appears because emotional cravings control behavior stronger than logic does. One difficult conversation ruins their mood for an entire day. One rejection destroys momentum completely. One insult causes endless mental obsession. This is what emotional weakness actually looks like in real life. It is not dramatic collapse. It is slow, invisible self-destruction happening through repeated impulsive decisions. The frightening part is that many emotionally reactive individuals never see the pattern clearly because ego protects them from self-awareness. Ego always creates excuses. It blames stress, childhood circumstances, unfair treatment, toxic people, bad luck, and misunderstanding. Rarely does it admit the deeper truth. Lack of emotional control silently poisons everything it touches. Financial instability often grows from impulsive emotional behavior. People spend emotionally. They quit emotionally. They argue emotionally. They escape discomfort emotionally. They seek pleasure emotionally. Instead of building patience, focus, and long-term thinking, they become trapped inside cycles of emotional reaction that slowly consume discipline. Meanwhile, emotionally disciplined individuals continue moving steadily even during discomfort, frustration, uncertainty, and pressure. They understand that emotional impulses are temporary, but consequences are permanent. That difference alone separates many successful lives from broken ones. One person obeys emotion instantly, while another observes emotion without surrendering to it. People argue not because they seek truth, but because they crave emotional dominance. Conversations become psychological battlegrounds where insecure minds fight desperately for significance. This is why so many arguments feel emotionally exhausting instead of intellectually meaningful. Individuals are not listening carefully. They are waiting emotionally, waiting to defend identity, waiting to protect ego, waiting to prove superiority. The louder the insecurity, the stronger the emotional reaction becomes. Some people interrupt constantly because silence makes them feel powerless. Others become aggressive because emotional intimidation temporarily hides inner weakness. Some attack personally because they lack the emotional stability required for honest discussion. Emotionally reactive individuals often mistake intensity for intelligence because emotional force gives the illusion of certainty. But emotionally disciplined people operate differently. They do not rush emotionally to defend every opinion because their identity is not built entirely on external agreement. They can remain calm during disagreement because disagreement does not threaten their psychological survival. This creates enormous power during conflict. The emotionally disciplined person keeps mental clarity while reactive individuals slowly lose rational thinking beneath emotional pressure. One side becomes consumed by proving something emotionally, while the other side continues observing strategically. This is why emotionally stable people often dominate high-pressure environments quietly. They preserve energy while emotional individuals waste it through constant internal chaos. Every unnecessary argument steals attention from growth. Every emotional battle drains focus that could have been invested into progress. Emotionally reactive people rarely understand how much of their life force disappears through pointless emotional conflict until years of wasted energy finally become impossible to ignore. There is something deeply unattractive about emotional instability that people sense immediately, even when nobody says it aloud. Emotionally reactive individuals often appear exhausting because others feel forced to manage their unpredictable emotional state constantly. One moment, everything feels peaceful, and the next moment tension enters the room because ego became offended by something small. Relationships become emotionally draining when one person lacks internal regulation. Friends begin walking carefully around emotionally impulsive individuals because honesty feels dangerous. Romantic partners lose emotional safety because every disagreement risks becoming emotional chaos. Professional relationships weaken because trust disappears around unstable behavior. People naturally feel drawn toward emotional stability because calmness creates psychological safety. Emotional discipline signals maturity, self-awareness, and inner strength, while constant emotional reactions reveal unresolved insecurity underneath surface confidence. Many emotionally reactive people try to compensate for this weakness through louder personalities, stronger opinions, or more dramatic emotional expression. But none of those things create true presence. Presence comes from emotional steadiness. It comes from remaining centered under pressure while others lose themselves emotionally. This is why emotionally disciplined individuals often become natural leaders without forcing authority aggressively. Others trust them during uncertainty because emotional stability creates reliability. Calm individuals think clearly when situations become difficult, while reactive individuals become trapped inside emotional confusion. Over time, people instinctively begin respecting emotional control more than emotional intensity, because emotional discipline reflects something extremely rare in modern society: inner order. The harsh truth is that emotional weakness often hides behind performances of confidence. Many emotionally reactive people appear strong on the surface, while secretly depending on constant external validation to maintain identity. Social media attention, compliments, agreement, praise, emotional reassurance, and public recognition becomes psychological fuel, keeping fragile self-worth alive temporarily. Without validation, insecurity quickly resurfaces. This creates endless emotional hunger because no amount of outside approval permanently repairs inner instability. Emotionally reactive individuals become trapped chasing emotional stimulation everywhere they go. They need responses. They need recognition. They need emotional reactions from others because silence forces them to confront themselves directly. This explains why some people constantly create drama around their lives. Chaos gives temporary emotional significance. Conflict creates identity. Attention creates emotional relief. But underneath all of it remains the same problem: lack of inner control. Emotionally disciplined individuals eventually stop expecting external validation to stabilize their emotions. They develop self-respect through behavior instead of attention. They trust discipline more than mood. They focus on long-term consequences instead of temporary emotional satisfaction. This mindset creates extraordinary psychological freedom because emotionally stable people no longer become controlled by every opinion, rejection, criticism, or emotional trigger entering their environment. They stop seeking emotional permission to feel valuable. They stop allowing strangers to determine their internal state. Emotional accountability begins the moment a person stops blaming the world for reactions they personally failed to control. That moment feels uncomfortable because it removes excuses completely, but it also becomes the beginning of genuine self-mastery. Successful, emotionally disciplined individuals think differently during stress because they understand emotions are information, not commands. Most people obey emotions automatically. Anxiety appears, and they panic. Anger appears, and they attack. Sadness appears, and they collapse into hopelessness. Emotionally disciplined people experience the same emotions but interpret them differently. They pause before acting. They separate temporary feelings from permanent decisions. They understand that emotional intensity often distorts perception. During conflict, they slow down internally instead of speeding up emotionally. During pressure, they protect clarity instead of surrendering to chaos. This ability changes financial decisions, relationship decisions, career decisions, and personal growth entirely. While emotionally reactive people burn opportunities through impulsiveness, emotionally disciplined individuals preserve long-term vision even under emotional strain. They understand that discomfort is not danger. Criticism is not destruction. Rejection is not worthlessness. Failure is not identity. This emotional separation creates resilience impossible to develop without self-control. Emotionally reactive individuals constantly search for comfort, while emotionally disciplined individuals train themselves to tolerate discomfort without emotional collapse. That difference compounds over years. One person becomes stronger through pressure, while another becomes consumed by it. Eventually, emotional discipline transforms the entire nervous system. Stress stops controlling behavior automatically. External chaos stops invading the mind so easily. Focus sharpens because emotional noise decreases. Confidence deepens because self-trust increases. The emotionally disciplined individual no longer fears difficult situations because they trust their ability to remain internally stable regardless of circumstances surrounding them. Eventually, the excuses stop sounding convincing even to yourself. You begin noticing how many of your emotional reactions were actually choices repeated so often they became automatic. You realize how much energy disappeared through unnecessary arguments, emotional impulsiveness, validation seeking, and ego protection. You see relationships damaged by pride, opportunities destroyed by emotional decisions, and peace sacrificed for temporary emotional satisfaction that never lasted anyway. This realization feels brutal because it removes the illusion that emotional weakness is harmless. Emotional weakness shapes identity, behavior, future opportunities, mental health, financial stability, and personal relationships more than most people ever admit openly. But this realization also creates a rare opportunity: accountability. The moment you stop romanticizing emotional impulsiveness, you finally gain the ability to change it consciously. Emotional discipline begins when you become honest about the destruction your reactions have caused quietly over time. No manipulation, no excuses, no blaming everyone else for emotional instability living inside your own mind. Real growth begins when you accept responsibility for your emotional patterns completely. That responsibility feels heavy at first because self-mastery requires painful self-awareness. You must confront ego, insecurity, attention addiction, emotional dependency, and impulsive behavior directly without hiding behind personality excuses anymore. But once you begin developing control, something powerful happens slowly. The world loses its ability to emotionally own you. Situations that once controlled your mood begin losing influence. Provocations stop feeling irresistible. Emotional pressure stops dominating your decisions. And in that transformation, you finally understand the truth emotionally disciplined people discover earlier than everyone else. The most powerful person in a tense conversation is rarely the loudest one. It is usually the individual who remains emotionally still while everyone else rushes to fill silence with noise. Most people fear silence because silence removes distraction. It removes performance. It removes emotional escape routes. In silence, people begin confronting themselves, and that discomfort becomes unbearable for emotionally weak minds. This is why insecure individuals talk excessively during conflict. They explain too much, defend too quickly, react too emotionally, and argue too desperately, because silence feels psychologically dangerous to them. Silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty removes control from emotionally reactive people. They depend on emotional movement to feel dominant. They depend on reactions to feel important. But emotionally disciplined individuals understand something most people never discover. Silence shifts psychological power immediately. The person who remains calm and silent during emotional chaos forces others to sit inside their own emotional instability without relief. Suddenly, the angry person hears their own desperation more clearly. The manipulator feels emotional access disappearing. The insecure individual begins exposing themselves through excessive words, nervous energy, and impulsive reactions. Silence, therefore, becomes more than absence of speech. It becomes controlled emotional pressure. It becomes invisible authority. Calm silence communicates emotional independence because it signals that your inner state does not require constant defense. This creates a psychological weight around emotionally disciplined individuals. People begin watching them more carefully because humans naturally search for emotional reactions they can interpret and control. When reactions disappear, mystery appears instead. And mystery unsettles emotionally reactive minds because they cannot predict what remains emotionally hidden. Emotionally weak people often believe they must constantly explain themselves to maintain respect. They defend every decision, justify every boundary, answer every accusation, and react to every misunderstanding because silence feels emotionally unsafe to them. Deep down, they fear being judged, ignored, misinterpreted, or emotionally dismissed. This fear creates compulsive emotional communication. They speak not from clarity, but from emotional urgency. But emotionally disciplined individuals operate from a completely different psychological framework. They understand that excessive explanation often weakens authority instead of strengthening it. The more desperate someone becomes to prove themselves emotionally, the more insecurity leaks through their behavior. Calm individuals understand that not every accusation deserves defense, and not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Sometimes silence protects dignity more effectively than words ever could. When emotionally controlled people remain silent under pressure, they communicate something powerful without speaking directly. They communicate that their self-worth does not depend on immediate approval. This creates tension inside emotionally reactive individuals because reactive minds expect emotional participation. They expect argument. They expect justification. They expect visible emotional engagement. When silence appears instead, the emotional dynamic changes completely. The reactive person begins exposing more of themselves while the silent person reveals almost nothing. Psychological control shifts quietly in that moment. One individual becomes emotionally transparent while the other remains unreadable. Human beings instinctively associate emotional restraint with hidden strength because calmness under pressure feels unnatural in a world addicted to emotional reaction. Silence, therefore, becomes psychological discipline in its purest form. It protects energy. It prevents unnecessary emotional damage. Silence becomes especially powerful around manipulative individuals because manipulators survive through emotional engagement. They provoke reactions to gain influence. They create confusion to pull others into emotional chaos. They ask emotionally loaded questions, searching for weakness. They use guilt, criticism, disrespect, and emotional pressure as tools designed to control attention and behavior. Most people unknowingly cooperate with manipulation by reacting impulsively. They defend themselves emotionally, explain excessively, or argue endlessly, hoping to change the manipulator through logic. But manipulators are rarely searching for truth. They are searching for emotional access. The moment emotional access disappears, their influence weakens immediately. This is why silence often destroys manipulation more effectively than confrontation. Silence removes emotional fuel completely. The manipulator suddenly loses the ability to guide the emotional atmosphere because the other person refuses to participate psychologically. This creates emotional frustration inside controlling individuals because silence interrupts their usual patterns of influence. They expect visible emotional movement and become unsettled when calm detachment replaces reaction. Emotionally disciplined people understand this deeply. They recognize that emotional restraint protects mental clarity during manipulation, while emotional impulsiveness strengthens the manipulator unconsciously. Silence, therefore, becomes emotional armor. Not coldness, not fear, not weakness, controlled detachment. It allows emotionally disciplined individuals to observe behavior without becoming consumed by it. They stop trying to emotionally convince toxic people to understand them. They stop feeding emotional chaos with endless explanations. Instead, they preserve their peace quietly, while emotionally unstable individuals continue collapsing beneath the weight of their own emotional noise. There is a reason powerful individuals throughout history often spoke carefully and sparingly. Human psychology naturally assigns greater value to emotional control than emotional excess. People who constantly speak emotionally reveal too much too quickly. Their fears, insecurities, frustrations, and emotional needs become visible through uncontrolled communication. But individuals who speak less often create psychological gravity around their presence. Others begin listening more carefully because restraint creates perceived value. Silence slows energy inside conversations. It creates tension. It forces attention. Emotionally reactive people often rush to fill silence because stillness exposes nervousness within them. They become uncomfortable when emotional stimulation disappears. Calm individuals use this instinct strategically. They understand that silence allows observation while emotional people continue revealing themselves unconsciously. In difficult conversations, the silent person often gains more information because emotionally impulsive individuals cannot tolerate quiet pressure for long. They eventually begin explaining, confessing, defending, or emotionally exposing themselves further. This changes social dynamics entirely. The emotionally disciplined individual remains mentally clear, while reactive individuals slowly lose composure through their own emotional urgency. Silence also protects emotional energy in ways most people never understand fully. Every unnecessary argument consumes attention. Every emotional reaction drains psychological focus. Every impulsive defense weakens inner stability. Emotionally disciplined people become selective with words because they understand that speech carries energy. They no longer waste emotional energy proving themselves to individuals committed to misunderstanding them. Instead, they develop controlled presence, a presence that feels calm but difficult to emotionally penetrate. Humans mistake silence for weakness because modern culture worships emotional visibility constantly. Everyone is encouraged to express, react, announce, explain, and emotionally perform themselves at all times. Silence, therefore, feels suspicious to emotionally reactive minds because they interpret emotional restraint as emotional inability. But emotionally intelligent individuals understand the opposite truth. Real weakness is losing control of your emotions publicly every time life creates pressure. Real weakness is needing constant validation through emotional expression. Real weakness is becoming emotionally owned by every opinion, insult, or provocation entering your environment. Silence requires discipline because silence demands emotional self-control. It demands patience. It demands the ability to tolerate misunderstanding without emotional collapse. Very few people possess this level of inner stability consistently. This is why calm silence often feels intimidating during conflict. The silent individual appears emotionally grounded, while reactive people appear increasingly unstable through excessive emotional behavior. Silence also creates mystery, and mystery creates psychological power naturally. Humans fear what they cannot emotionally predict. When someone remains calm and unreadable during tension, others begin projecting assumptions onto them automatically. The silent person becomes psychologically larger because emotional information remains unavailable. Emotionally reactive people cannot understand this dynamic because they constantly seek emotional release through words. They mistake emotional discharge for strength. But emotionally disciplined individuals understand that protecting inner peace sometimes means refusing emotional participation entirely. They recognize that many conflicts are not searching for resolution. They are searching for emotional consumption. Silence refuses that transaction completely. Emotionally mature individuals eventually develop a relationship with silence that emotionally weak people never experience. Silence stops feeling empty and begins feeling protective. They no longer fear pauses during conversations because pauses no longer threaten identity. They no longer rush emotionally to fill every uncomfortable moment with explanations or reactions. Instead, silence becomes space for observation, reflection, and control. During conflict, silence allows the nervous system to remain regulated, while emotionally reactive individuals become consumed by impulse. During manipulation, silence creates emotional distance, protecting clarity from chaos. During social judgment, silence prevents unnecessary emotional exposure. Calm individuals understand that speaking emotionally during moments of pressure often creates consequences impossible to reverse later. Words spoken impulsively during anger, frustration, humiliation, or insecurity frequently damage relationships, opportunities, and reputations permanently. Silence, therefore, becomes strategic patience. It creates time between emotion and action. That space changes everything psychologically. Most destructive emotional decisions happen because people react before awareness arrives. Emotionally disciplined individuals train themselves to pause inside that critical moment. They feel emotion fully without surrendering behavior to it automatically. Over time, this restraint creates profound emotional stability. External chaos loses influence because internal control strengthens steadily. Calm silence begins changing how others perceive them as well. People sense emotional groundedness instinctively. They notice who reacts impulsively and who remains composed under pressure. Respect grows naturally around those who preserve emotional control because emotional steadiness feels increasingly rare in modern society. Eventually, silence stops being something you use occasionally and becomes part of your identity completely. You stop reacting to every provocation because emotional peace becomes more valuable than temporary emotional victory. You stop defending yourself endlessly because self-respect no longer depends on convincing emotionally unstable people to understand you. You stop arguing with manipulators because you recognize that emotional chaos is the environment where they feel strongest. Instead, your calmness begins creating invisible boundaries around your mind naturally. People notice that emotional access to you has become limited. Arguments no longer pull you in easily. Criticism no longer controls your emotional state automatically. Tension no longer forces immediate reaction. Your silence becomes heavier because it is no longer rooted in fear, confusion, or insecurity. It is rooted in discipline. This changes every interaction slowly. Emotionally reactive individuals begin exposing themselves while you remain composed. Manipulators begin losing influence because emotional openings disappear. Insecure people become uncomfortable because your calmness forces them to confront their own emotional instability directly. And somewhere inside this transformation, you realize the deepest truth about silence. Silence is not passive. Silence is controlled power refusing to waste itself. It is emotional intelligence without performance. It is self-respect without explanation. It is calmness sharp enough to end conflict without aggression. The most emotionally dangerous people in the world are rarely loud. They are the ones who can stand completely still while chaos searches desperately for a reaction that never comes. Most people spend years trying to control the outside world while remaining completely controlled by the inside of their own mind. They try to change people's circumstances, conversations, and environments, hoping peace will finally arrive once life becomes easier. But emotional mastery begins with a far more uncomfortable realization. Your emotions are not created only by the world around you. They are created by the meaning your mind attaches to what happens. Two people can experience the same insult and respond completely differently because emotional reactions are shaped by internal conditioning more than external events. This is why emotional control must be trained consciously. It is not natural for most people because the human mind is designed for survival, not peace. The brain reacts quickly to threat, rejection, disrespect, uncertainty, and discomfort because ancient survival systems still influence modern behavior. A delayed message can now trigger anxiety. A disagreement can trigger emotional defense. A small criticism can feel like danger inside the nervous system. Emotionally strong individuals are not born without emotional reactions. They simply train themselves to observe emotion before obeying it automatically. This changes everything psychologically. The moment awareness appears between emotion and behavior, self-control becomes possible. Without awareness, people live mechanically. Trigger arrives. Emotion rises. Reaction follows. The cycle repeats endlessly. Emotionally disciplined individuals interrupt this cycle deliberately. They begin noticing breathing patterns, body tension, internal dialogue, and emotional impulses before those impulses take control completely. This awareness feels subtle at first, but it becomes one of the most powerful transformations a human being can experience because the mind slowly stops controlling you unconsciously. Instead, you begin controlling the mind intentionally. The first stage of becoming emotionally untouchable is learning how to slow the nervous system before emotion fully takes over. Most people react too quickly because their body enters emotional survival mode almost instantly during stress, conflict, embarrassment, or pressure. Heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tighten, and thoughts accelerate aggressively. In that state, emotional intelligence disappears because survival energy dominates awareness. This is why controlled breathing becomes one of the most underestimated forms of emotional discipline in existence. Calm breathing sends signals directly into the nervous system, telling the brain that danger is not as immediate as emotion suggests. Emotionally disciplined individuals train themselves to breathe slowly during pressure because they understand that the body influences the mind as much as the mind influences the body. A slow, controlled breath creates a psychological space between emotional impulse and conscious action. Inside that space, clarity begins returning. Instead of reacting immediately, they observe what is happening internally. They notice anger rising without becoming anger itself. They notice anxiety appearing without surrendering identity to anxiety. This shift changes emotional experience completely. Emotion stops feeling like an uncontrollable force and begins feeling like temporary internal energy moving through awareness. Most people never develop this skill because emotional reactions feel urgent and convincing in the moment. The mind always tells emotional stories that demand immediate action. Defend yourself now. Respond immediately. Attack back instantly. Prove your worth immediately. Emotionally disciplined individuals learn to distrust emotional urgency. They understand that emotions become distorted when the nervous system is overwhelmed. Instead of acting impulsively, they slow themselves deliberately. And through repetition, the mind slowly learns a new pattern. Self-observation becomes the foundation of emotional mastery, because you cannot control patterns you refuse to notice honestly. Most emotional reactions happen through subconscious habits built over years of repetition. A person criticized constantly during childhood may become defensive automatically as an adult. Someone emotionally ignored may crave validation compulsively without realizing why. Someone raised in emotional chaos may unconsciously recreate conflict because calmness feels unfamiliar to their nervous system. Emotionally disciplined individuals begin studying these patterns carefully instead of blindly obeying them. They observe which situations trigger insecurity, frustration, anxiety, jealousy, or anger most intensely. They pay attention to internal dialogue because thoughts shape emotional experience continuously. A single thought repeated often enough becomes emotional conditioning. If the mind constantly repeats ideas of rejection, disrespect, failure, or inadequacy, the nervous system eventually treats those thoughts like reality. This is why emotionally strong individuals become extremely careful about what they mentally rehearse every day. They stop feeding emotional chaos through endless negative thinking. They interrupt destructive mental loops before those loops become emotional suffering. Overthinking loses power once awareness enters the process consciously. Instead of believing every thought automatically emotionally disciplined, people learn to question thoughts objectively. Is this thought helping clarity or feeding emotional instability? Is this fear real or imagined? Is this emotional reaction connected to the present moment or an older unresolved wound resurfacing again? These questions create emotional distance from impulsive thinking patterns. Over time, the mind becomes less reactive because awareness weakens subconscious emotional habits gradually. Patience plays a critical role in emotional transformation because emotional conditioning developed over years cannot disappear instantly. Many people attempt self-control briefly, then become frustrated when old emotional reactions return during stress. But emotionally disciplined individuals understand that mastery is built through repetition, not perfection. Every moment of awareness strengthens new neural patterns slowly. Every time you pause instead of reacting impulsively, the brain begins rewiring itself. Every time you choose calmness over emotional chaos, self-control becomes slightly stronger. This process feels invisible at first because growth inside the mind happens quietly before visible transformation appears externally. Most people quit emotional discipline too early because they expect immediate perfection instead of gradual progress. But the emotionally strong understand something deeper. Real transformation happens through consistency during ordinary moments, during difficult conversations, during criticism, during loneliness, during frustration, during uncertainty. These moments become emotional training grounds for the mind. Emotionally reactive individuals continue obeying impulses automatically, while emotionally disciplined individuals continue practicing awareness repeatedly. Slowly, the nervous system changes. Emotional triggers lose intensity. Recovery becomes faster. Internal calmness becomes more natural. Situations that once created emotional chaos begin losing influence because the mind no longer interprets everything as psychological threat. Patience, therefore, becomes emotional power itself. Calm individuals do not force peace aggressively. They build it carefully through disciplined repetition over time. This creates profound inner confidence because emotionally disciplined people stop fearing their own emotions. They trust themselves to remain stable even during pressure, uncertainty, or emotional discomfort. Emotionally strong people think differently under stress because they train their internal dialogue intentionally. Most emotionally reactive individuals speak to themselves harshly during difficult situations. Their mind becomes filled with catastrophic thinking, insecurity, self-criticism, and emotional exaggeration. One mistake becomes proof of failure. One rejection becomes proof of worthlessness. One conflict becomes emotional disaster. The nervous system absorbs this internal language constantly and reacts accordingly. Emotionally disciplined individuals become aware that thoughts are shaping emotional reality every moment. They understand that internal dialogue either stabilizes the mind or destabilizes it further. This awareness changes the way they speak to themselves internally during pressure. Instead of escalating emotional chaos, they create internal steadiness deliberately. They remind themselves that emotions are temporary. They remind themselves that discomfort is survivable. They remind themselves to observe rather than react. This is not fake positivity. It is mental discipline. The ability to guide thought instead of becoming controlled by thought automatically. Emotional mastery, therefore, depends heavily on conscious thinking patterns repeated consistently over time. The mind slowly becomes what it practices daily. If it practices emotional chaos, it becomes emotionally chaotic. If it practices awareness, patience, clarity, and restraint, emotional stability begins strengthening naturally. Emotionally strong individuals also protect their attention carefully because attention feeds emotional energy directly. Constant exposure to negativity, outrage, toxic environments, and emotional stimulation weakens mental clarity over time. Calm individuals become selective about what enters their mind because they understand emotional peace requires psychological boundaries. They stop feeding unnecessary emotional noise and begin protecting inner stillness intentionally. Silence becomes deeply important during emotional training because silence allows awareness to become louder than distraction. Most people remain emotionally overwhelmed because their minds never become still long enough to observe themselves honestly. Noise surrounds modern life constantly. Endless opinions, endless stimulation, endless emotional information, flooding attention every day. In that environment, emotional reactions become automatic because awareness never has time to deepen properly. Emotionally disciplined individuals create moments of intentional silence because silence strengthens self-observation. During silence, hidden emotional patterns become visible. You notice which thoughts repeat constantly. You notice unresolved fears seeking attention. You notice how quickly the mind searches for stimulation, distraction, and emotional escape. This awareness feels uncomfortable initially because silence removes emotional anesthesia. But eventually silence becomes healing. The nervous system begins calming naturally. Thoughts slow down. Emotional intensity decreases. Clarity returns quietly. Many emotionally reactive people avoid silence because silence forces confrontation with unresolved internal instability. Emotionally strong individuals move towards silence because they understand that peace cannot grow inside constant mental chaos. Through silence, patience, and observation, they slowly become emotionally independent from external stimulation. Their calmness stops depending entirely on circumstances because inner stability begins developing internally. This transformation changes relationships, conversations, decisions, and personal identity completely. Emotional reactions no longer dominate every moment automatically. Instead, awareness begins guiding behavior intentionally. And with every repetition, emotional discipline becomes less like effort and more like identity, gradually forming from the inside outward. Eventually, a moment arrives where you realize your mind no longer behaves the way it once did. Situations that previously controlled your emotions begin losing power quietly. Stress no longer invades your nervous system as deeply. Criticism no longer destroys inner balance automatically. Anger still appears sometimes, but it no longer owns your behavior completely. You begin feeling space inside yourself where chaos once lived constantly. That space is emotional freedom. It is created through discipline repeated so consistently that calmness becomes natural instead of forced. The world around you may remain noisy, impatient, emotional, and unstable, but your internal world begins changing permanently. You stop reacting to every emotional impulse because awareness now arrives faster than reaction. You stop fearing difficult emotions because you trust your ability to remain steady while experiencing them. This creates a profound sense of peace impossible to explain fully to emotionally reactive minds. Calmness begins feeling powerful rather than passive. Patience begins feeling intelligent rather than weak. Silence begins feeling restorative rather than empty. You become more present because emotional noise no longer consumes attention constantly. Decisions improve because clarity replaces impulsiveness. Confidence deepens because self-trust strengthens. And slowly, without dramatic announcement, you evolve into someone emotionally different from who you once were. Someone calmer. Someone clearer. Someone mentally stronger. The outside world still tests you occasionally, but now there is discipline where chaos once existed. Awareness where impulsiveness once dominated. Peace where emotional exhaustion once lived. And in that transformation, you finally understand the deepest truth about emotional mastery. The greatest victory is not controlling other people. It is learning how to remain in control of yourself no matter what life places in front of you. There comes a moment in emotional growth where the noise of the world stops feeling important in the same way it once did. The opinions that used to disturb your peace lose their emotional weight slowly. The rejection that once felt personal begins feeling temporary. The disrespect that once demanded reaction no longer controls your nervous system automatically. Something changes internally when a person finally stops depending on the outside world for emotional stability. Most people spend their entire lives emotionally connected to external reactions. Their mood changes according to how others treat them. Their confidence rises and falls according to validation, attention, approval, and recognition. They become emotionally controlled by opinions, comments, criticism, and social judgment without even realizing it. But emotionally untouchable individuals break this psychological dependence completely. They stop asking the world for permission to feel worthy, peaceful, or confident. This creates an entirely different way of moving through life. Calmness becomes natural because emotional survival no longer depends on constant reassurance from others. The mind stops reacting to every emotional disturbance because inner stability becomes stronger than external chaos. Emotionally independent people understand something most individuals never fully realize. Freedom begins the moment your emotional state no longer belongs to strangers. That freedom feels almost unreal at first because most human beings have spent years unconsciously surrendering emotional control to circumstances, people, and temporary events. But once emotional independence becomes real, a deep, quiet strength begins forming inside you. Not loud confidence, not emotional performance. Something calmer, something heavier, something rooted in self-control instead of emotional reaction. And that internal shift changes every relationship, conversation, conflict, and decision moving forward. Emotionally untouchable individuals do not become peaceful because life suddenly becomes easier. They become peaceful because they stop allowing external chaos to enter their internal world so easily. Pressure still exists. Rejection still exists. Conflict still exists. Disrespect still exists. But emotionally disciplined people experience these situations differently because their identity is no longer emotionally fragile. They understand that criticism does not define worth. Failure does not destroy identity. Rejection does not erase value. This psychological separation creates enormous emotional freedom because the nervous system stops treating every challenge like personal destruction. Emotionally reactive people constantly absorb emotional energy from the environment around them. A negative conversation ruins their mood. A stressful situation destroys their focus. A disrespectful interaction invades their thoughts for hours. Emotionally untouchable individuals protect their minds differently. They observe situations without emotionally merging with them completely. This does not mean they stop caring. It means they stop surrendering peace automatically. Calmness becomes a form of emotional intelligence because they recognize that preserving mental clarity matters more than emotional impulse. They stop reacting instantly because they understand that every reaction either strengthens emotional discipline or weakens it. Over time, this creates silent confidence impossible to imitate artificially. They no longer chase emotional victory in every interaction because they understand that true power often means refusing emotional participation entirely. While reactive individuals continue exhausting themselves through unnecessary emotional battles, emotionally disciplined people conserve energy, protect focus, and remain internally stable. That stability becomes visible without effort because calmness under pressure always attracts attention. One of the deepest transformations in emotional mastery happens when a person finally learns to walk away from unnecessary conflict without guilt. Most emotionally reactive individuals feel psychologically trapped by confrontation. They believe every insult requires response, every misunderstanding requires explanation, and every disrespectful person deserves emotional engagement. But emotionally untouchable individuals recognize a dangerous truth. Not every battle deserves your energy. Many conflicts are distractions designed to consume emotional focus rather than create understanding. Toxic people often survive through emotional access. They provoke reactions because reactions give them influence. They create emotional chaos because emotionally unstable environments allow manipulation more easily. Emotionally disciplined individuals stop feeding these dynamics completely. They understand that protecting peace sometimes means leaving conversations, situations, environments, and relationships that consistently destroy emotional balance. This decision requires enormous self-respect because walking away often feels uncomfortable at first. Ego wants emotional revenge. Pride wants validation. Insecurity wants to prove worth. But emotionally untouchable people begin valuing inner peace more than emotional satisfaction. They no longer confuse emotional intensity with strength. They understand that self-control creates far greater power than emotional domination ever could. This mindset changes the way they handle criticism, arguments, and social pressure entirely. Instead of emotionally defending themselves constantly, they remain emotionally centered. Instead of trying to win every interaction, they protect mental clarity carefully. This creates a psychological freedom because emotionally manipulative individuals lose influence when emotional access disappears. Calm detachment, therefore, becomes more than behavior. It becomes emotional protection. There is something profoundly attractive about emotional stability that people sense immediately, even when they cannot explain it clearly. Emotionally untouchable individuals create calmness around themselves because their presence is not driven by emotional desperation. They do not seek constant validation through attention reactions or approval. They do not force dominance through aggression. They do not perform confidence loudly for recognition. Their confidence becomes quiet because it is no longer dependent on emotional reinforcement from the outside world. This creates natural authority in conversations, relationships, leadership, and social environments. People trust emotionally stable individuals more because emotional steadiness creates a psychological safety. Calm people think clearly during pressure, while emotionally reactive individuals often collapse into impulsive behavior. Over time, this difference becomes impossible to ignore. Emotionally disciplined individuals make better decisions because emotional chaos no longer clouds judgment constantly. They listen more carefully. They observe more deeply. They respond more intentionally. Their emotional control creates presence, and that presence slowly becomes influence. Others begin respecting them naturally because calmness under stress feels increasingly rare in modern society. Most people are emotionally overstimulated constantly. Endless opinions, endless outrage, endless reactions consuming attention every day. In that environment, emotional peace becomes powerful. Silence becomes powerful. Patience becomes powerful. Emotionally untouchable individuals no longer seek significance through emotional performance because internal stability already provides what external validation once temporarily supplied. They stop needing to prove themselves constantly. And ironically, the less they seek attention emotionally, the more psychological weight their presence begins carrying naturally in every environment they enter. Peace eventually becomes more valuable than ego because emotionally disciplined individuals finally understand how expensive emotional chaos truly is. Emotional reactions drain focus, destroy clarity, weaken discipline, and consume energy that could have been invested into growth, purpose, and self-development. Most people do not realize how much of their life force disappears through unnecessary emotional conflict until they finally experience internal calmness consistently. Only then do they recognize how exhausting emotional instability truly was. Emotionally untouchable people protect their peace carefully because they understand that mental energy shapes the quality of life itself. They stop allowing temporary emotions to control permanent decisions. They stop carrying emotional poison from one situation into every other part of life. They stop replaying arguments endlessly inside their minds. Instead, they learn to release emotional weight quickly and return attention back toward what actually matters. This creates extraordinary mental clarity because emotional noise decreases dramatically. Focus sharpens. Sleep improves. Relationships deepen. Confidence stabilizes. Calmness becomes part of identity rather than temporary mood. Most importantly, emotional independence creates inner freedom impossible to purchase externally. When your peace no longer depends entirely on circumstances, people approval, or emotional outcomes, the world loses much of its power to disturb you psychologically. This does not make life emotionless. It makes life balanced. You still feel deeply, but emotions no longer dominate behavior automatically. Awareness now guides action instead of impulse. And through that discipline, a quiet kind of strength begins growing inside you steadily. A strength rooted not in controlling others, but in finally learning how to remain centered regardless of what happens around you. Emotionally untouchable individuals begin living differently because their relationship with themselves transforms completely. They stop abandoning inner peace to satisfy ego. They stop betraying personal boundaries for temporary approval. They stop performing emotional reactions to fit social expectations. Instead, they become deeply selective about where attention, energy, and emotional investment are placed. This selectiveness creates powerful emotional boundaries naturally. Drama loses attraction because calmness now feels more valuable. Chaos loses influence because internal order becomes stronger. Emotional manipulation loses effectiveness because self-awareness exposes psychological games immediately. The emotionally disciplined mind begins recognizing patterns clearly. It notices who feeds on conflict. It notices who projects insecurity onto others. It notices which environments strengthen peace and which environments destroy it. This awareness changes the trajectory of life quietly. Decisions become wiser because emotional desperation no longer controls them. Relationships become healthier because emotional dependency weakens. Conversations become calmer because silence no longer feels threatening. The mind itself begins feeling lighter because emotional clutter slowly disappears. Most people spend years searching externally for confidence, peace, and power, while emotionally untouchable individuals discover those things internally through discipline, awareness, and self-control. This creates a calm type of confidence that does not need constant display. They no longer seek emotional superiority because emotional stability already gives them something greater. Freedom from psychological dependence. Freedom from emotional chaos. Freedom from needing every person's situation or outcome to behave perfectly in order to feel internally balanced. And within that freedom, something extraordinary happens quietly. In the end, the greatest transformation is not becoming emotionless. It is becoming emotionally free. Free from the need to react to every insult. Free from emotional addiction to validation, attention, and approval. Free from allowing chaos to dictate your inner world constantly. The emotionally untouchable mindset is not coldness. It is disciplined peace. It is learning how to remain internally steady while the world around you continues demanding emotional reactions endlessly. This level of control changes everything. Your words become calmer because urgency disappears. Your decisions become clearer because emotional fog no longer controls perception. Your presence becomes stronger because internal balance creates quiet authority impossible to fake. People begin sensing this difference without fully understanding it. They notice that emotional pressure no longer controls you easily. They notice that conflict no longer steals your peace automatically. They notice that your calmness remains stable even when situations become difficult, uncertain, or emotionally intense. And somewhere during this transformation, you finally understand the truth most people spend their entire lives missing. Real power was never about controlling other people. It was never about winning every argument, proving every point, or dominating every situation emotionally. Real power is far quieter than that. Real power is waking up each day with a mind no longer owned by chaos. Real power is protecting your peace in a world addicted to emotional noise. Real power is standing calmly in situations that once controlled you completely and realizing you are no longer the same person anymore. Because the moment you stop reacting to everything is the moment you finally begin controlling yourself.